Yo, what's up everyone? My name is Zenitsu, and we are back with another Digimon video. So today, I'm going to be doing another episode in underrated but awesome decks to play in the Digimon TCG. So, before I get into the actual decks this episode, if you're enjoying this type of content and you want to see more, feel free to leave a like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date when I upload or go live next, and feel free to tell me your thoughts about any of the decks down in the comments below. But just as a quick disclaimer, I do want to point out on what underrated actually means, because some people might not exactly understand what the definition of underrated is. So underrated is to basically underestimate the extent, value, or importance of someone or something. So for Digimon decks, this could just literally mean older decks that aren't seeing play, or bad decks, in quotation mark, that might be able to do some surprising things, or even decks that haven't necessarily topped in a large event in a while, but can still do well at the locals level. So those are mainly the types of decks that I'm going to be referring to when I'm talking about these decks being underrated. So keep in mind, not all of these are probably going to be super competitive, and I don't necessarily recommend that you're taking them to large events, but they're still decks that can be fun and reasonable to play nonetheless. So without further ado, let's kick it over to some of the decks and see what we're going to be looking at today. Alright, and so the first deck on the docket today is going to be one that I'm pretty passionate about, because I really do like and enjoy what Atmon brings to the table. Obviously, they liked the link mechanic so much that they added it to option cards now, so there is something to what Atmon is doing that's actually good and reasonable. I have a whole YouTube video covering Atmon if you want to go watch that, but to kind of like summarize that video and the reason why Atmon aren't necessarily highly regarded or effective is mostly because the app fuse mechanic doesn't actually work the way that Bandai probably thought or intended. On pen and paper it kind of does, because the idea is you're going to take your two Digimon, and then you're going to have one linked with the other, and then get a free Digivolution into the higher stage Digimon. The problem with this is where things are starting to break down, because you have too many app fuses that rely on too many different Digimon, and because you don't actually have ways of mitigating the high Digivolution cost, you're not always going to be app fusing, and if you're not app fusing, your cards are just way less effective and efficient than they reasonably should be. So when it comes to how Ares' deck is actually functioning, you are going to be leveraging a Big Bang Punch as the big key card to make kind of the whole deck work, because this allows you to app fuse mid-attack as long as you have your tamer set up. So this just gains you a free link, and then when you link, you're going to be able to get plus 3000 DP and be able to then app fuse. So that's kind of the core gimmick, but again, not all the time you're going to be able to app fuse. So what are you going to be doing in those situations where you can't app fuse is the big solution that I was trying to solve, and well, obviously Airy being in blue, we actually can leverage some generic options in order to help us try to gain some memory, like Hammer Spark, but the big one is going to actually try to take this high Digivolution cost and try to figure out ways to reduce it down for when we can't app fuse. Because let's just say we have a Dosukumon in our hand and no actual way to be able to app fuse, then we're not really able to utilize Ojimon all too well. But again, that's where a card like Win Rate 60% can come in, because this is a card that actually can help reduce the Digivolution cost to make those types of plays possible. So that's kind of like the whole spin on how we could approach Atmon going forward to be able to make them a little bit more playable, is utilizing other options to be able to help reduce the Digivolution cost of our cards. Win rate 60% is a little bit of an awkward card, but still good enough, because most of the time we're going to be using win rate 60% to go into our level 5s when we're unable to app fuse, and that does require specific colors in order for it to work, but with the way that the ratios generally tend to play out for Atmon decks, you're going to have your protagonist evolution line, which is going to be your more offensively focused cards, and this is going to be the one that we're going to be running in higher quantities. So to realistically utilize win rate 60%, you're just going to have literally any of the red or blue cards, which there's plenty of in the deck to be able to discard to get that reduced Digivolution cost. And the villain line is the supporting line, and this is the card that we're most likely just trying to use to link with our main protagonist Digimon for some good defensive and control capabilities. So that's kind of where this whole thing comes into play, and she's really only supported by like her level 4 Digimon or their level 4 Digimon. You could apply this to pretty much any app-based deck. Then when it comes to just some other generic app cards that you're going to want to look out for, Haru being the mem setter is going to be very, very good, just because even though we don't have ways to be able to play him out for free, because even if you were to run something like a Digital Gate Open, you again need to have color coordination, and that's not necessarily the easiest thing. I think Ares deck is actually one of the better ones to run it because it does have a decent amount of naturally red Digimon. So I think like that's a type of card that you could consider thinking about just to be able to play out the Tamers, but I think the Tamers are a little bit less important than getting Bang Bang Punch set up. So at least like for how Ares deck is working. So that's kind of like my whole spin and approach on trying to figure out a way to fix Atmon, utilizing some slightly older or unconventional tools to be able to try to mitigate the high Digivolution cost on a lot of our Digimon that require the App Fuse mechanic. And this next deck that I'm going to be talking about is going to be a fan favorite, beloved by many, and it did get a pretty decent upgrade in EX10. Whether it could actually hold in the current BT23 environment is to be determined, but I don't necessarily think this deck is actually that bad. So Beelzemon really isn't going to be doing anything it hasn't been doing. The deck is just strictly about milling yourself as much as humanly possible, so that way you could get Beelzemon X Antibodies ability to rip through the opponent's security in a single go, and you're going to use Beelzemon Blast Mode to be able to get you some extra attacks or an extra attack to actually close out the game. So it's doing some really decent things in terms of its game plan. It has lots of really good and annoying options, which are going to be very powerful, not only just as mill triggers, but in your security as well. Then on top of all of that, you just have relatively decent tempo because of your Tamer not only being a really good searcher, but also rigging your mills. So the deck is doing some really strong things. It's just that the time it takes sometimes to set up and the cards that you need to see in particular orders could be a little bit awkward, but I really don't think the deck is that bad, especially since Beelzemon Ace actually has some really powerful abilities going on with him, mostly the D-Digivolve, because D-Digivolve is incredibly powerful, but also the fact that he's an Ace Digimon means that we could use this in combination with our level 5 Digimon, because both of our Balmons have really decent abilities that combo with our Ace. So we have the new Balmon, which will grant him blocker and reboot, on top of the fact that if this Balmon does end up getting deleted, then he gets to play out a Beelzemon from our trash for free, which could very easily be the Ace. Then we also have the old starter deck one that is allowing us to have a buff on our Digimon that's basically going to allow us to play out a Beelzemon as well, so we could use this to try to set up an Ace bait where it's going to delete our Ace, and then we're going to be able to replay the Ace that was just deleted. So that's kind of a whole synergy there between the Balmons and the Ace, making the Ace a very strong card on top of everything else that the deck is doing. Right now, this iteration of the deck is actually trying to maximize on mill triggers. So we do have the brand new Impmon that is going to not only just help us turbo mill, especially if we move him out of the raising area, but this Impmon actually does come with a mill trigger that's allowing us to be able to delete the opponent's low level Digimon, which is also pretty valuable and important at times. So there's just already a lot of really good things going into Beelzemon. It's just the whole milling aspect. It does tend to make the deck a little bit less consistent than others, but that doesn't mean it's not a very fun deck to play for when it does go off. It feels very rewarding. And then when it comes to the last deck I'm going to be talking about for this video, that is going to be yet again another purple deck, and this time it is going to be Ghosts. So Ghosts actually got some pretty good upgrades in BT23, going from something that was just barely okay to something that's actually really reasonable and can do some very powerful things. So Ghost's whole identity is about self-deletion. It wants to kill its own Digimon to trigger a lot of its own on-delete effects. I know technically a lot of other decks do it, but this deck has the unique mechanic Execute to actually be able to accomplish that goal while controlling the field at the same time. Because Execute, if you need a reminder, allows you to be able to attack at the end of the turn. So there's that like little blitz type of ability, on top of the fact that it could attack into the opponent's unsuspended Digimon. So if your Digimon just want to try to kill the opponent's Digimon, similar to Raid, then it's a good way of doing it. We are going to be leveraging a little bit of retaliation inheritables, so that way if our Digimon are smaller than the opponent's, we could still execute, delete their Digimon, or attempt to delete their Digimon utilizing our inheritable abilities. But as far as the main goal of the deck, it is obviously to try to get into our level 7 and capitalize on all of his abilities. So he is very similar to the old BT20 Necromon, having Security Attack Plus and Execute, which is really good. But what this card is doing, because obviously it needs to be better than the level 6, is the fact that it also has Piercing, so that way we could use the Execute to kill an opponent's Digimon and attack into it, and then deal the damage because of Piercing. Then he comes with his own Control when Digivolving ability that also just so happens to come with a DP buff if nothing was deleted, so that way you could combo this with Execute to make sure that you're going to be deleting whatever Digimon you wanted to. Then when he dies, he's going to replace himself with a level 6 or lower Ghost trait, and that allows us to toolbox our level 6s with Ghost traits to be able to do various different things. So you could run the cute tech card of Reapermon to be able to have some extra defensive plays and a pseudo floodgate towards specific mechanics and playstyles. Then you do have the new Necromon, which is obviously weaker than the old Necromon because there is no removal ability, but this is really good for when you're swarming on having the protection for your extra body. So this is just nice to be able to keep your Digimon around while also being able to play out more Digimon, very similarly to the old Necromon, which again is just Dullaha Light, so it's just more removal and more swarm potential, while this and the level 7 are going to be your main Digimon you want to try to aggress with because they both have Security Attack Plus. But the idea is you're going to be executing, gaining a whole bunch of memory back for your Digimon being deleted, control the field, and then swarm the field with all of your on-delete abilities because Dullahan can play out a Necro, Necro can play out a level 5, the level 5 inheritable lets you play out a level 4. You could kind of just reuse a lot of your parts and pieces to be able to do various different things depending on the situation and setup. Because of the flexibility of these new level 7s, we could either digivolve the Dullahan off of the level 5, or we just can digivolve it off of a level 6 the traditional fashion. So it's cool that we have different access points on how we're going to be utilizing our cards, and the fact that a lot of our cards do have very similar abilities means that if we don't necessarily see the exact one that we want, we're not necessarily left without any plays. But all of that is fine and dandy, and one of the biggest weaknesses of the deck was it really didn't have a meaningful way of utilizing any of its cards. So you play out all of these extra bodies and then you don't have anything to do with it. Well, introducing the new Violet, which actually gives us Rush. So when we execute, gain a whole bunch of memory back, play out a whole bunch of Digimon, we actually can use some of them to be able to further our overall aggression. So even though this isn't exactly an OTK deck, it definitely seems more like a control or mid-range style of deck. And we do have a lot of additional powerful plays that we can make thanks to to the introduction of the unique emblem being able to give us more access at Digivolution, as well as still running a lot of just what the deck was already running to make our cards as efficient as we possibly can. Speaking of efficiency, we also do have the brand new Phantomon, which is going to be doing something very similar to the old Phantomon. So the big difference is you're trading the Execute ability for the ability to warp off of your level 3 as long as we have a Tamer set up, and because we are a purple deck, we should be able to utilize this warp ability a little bit easier than the average Liberator deck, which is really good. And then the level 4s and level 3s is kind of just whatever. You're mostly just playing the ghosts because these are just the best ghosts that we have. We have the deck's classic searching tool, the classic reduce the Digivolution when digivolving, and then we have the just filler tech card that does something decent for the deck. But the most important part is the inheritable to just gain memory. And that's kind of why like our level 4s are echoing that same sentiment. We do have a lot of classic tools like it being able to play out our Tamer if we don't necessarily have one. We have some good draw and discard, but again, the inheritables of retaliation to combo with execute and additional memory generation is really, really good because we want to try to gain as much memory off of our execute plays as possible to be able to maintain turn and continue putting as much pressure on the opponent as we can, which is why a card like Analog Youth is actually really, really good for the deck because it basically synergizes with everything that the deck is trying to do because of where the execute mechanic is coming from. So you could kind of see just all of the moving parts and pieces to be able to make a very reasonable and very strong deck while not being super overly oppressive. But that's all the decks that I have for today's video. Thank you everyone for watching and making it all the way to the end. I really do appreciate every single one of you, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Later.